A black woman arrived at the ranch expecting to lose her freedom before sunrise. But the cowboy waiting inside handed her something she never expected. The stagecoach ticket slipped from her fingers as a fist pounded against the bedroom door. Outside, boots creaked across the wooden hallway, and the wind rattled the window frame hard enough to make the glass tremble. Her suitcase sat packed beside the bed. Then a shadow stopped outside her room, and instead of reaching for the handle, the cowboy left 3 strange items on the floor and walked away. What would you have done in her place? Share your thoughts below and come along for the journey. The dust storm rolled across Medicine Ridge like a living thing. Red dirt swept over the wagon road, rattling dry grass and fence posts as the sky turned the color of rust. Savannah Reed sat beside her uncle without speaking. Her canvas suitcase rested between her boots. One hand stayed on the worn handle the entire journey. Ethan Reed smelled of whiskey and nervous sweat. He kept clearing his throat. He kept looking away. Neither of them mentioned where they were going. The wagon crested a low ridge, and Cedar Run Ranch appeared below. A long stretch of pasture lay beneath the distant Bighorn Mountains. Weathered fences cut across the land. A barn stood near a cluster of cottonwood trees. Beyond it, Savannah could see horses gathered around a narrow stream that looked smaller than it should have been. Cold Creek, the only water for miles. Ethan pulled the wagon to a stop near the ranch house. The wind whistled through the corral rails. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Ethan climbed down. "Come on," he muttered. Savannah looked at him. The man who had promised to look after her parents died could barely meet her eyes now. She stepped down from the wagon. Her boots hit Wyoming dirt. The ranch house door opened. A tall man emerged. Broad shoulders, dark hat, work shirt rolled at the sleeves. Cole Walker. He walked toward them without hurry, without a smile, without judgment. Just steady. Ethan started talking before Cole even reached them. "I brought her like we agreed." The words landed harder than the wind. Savannah lowered her eyes. "Like we agreed. Not a niece, not a person, just part of a bargain." Cole looked at Ethan, then at Savannah. His gaze lingered only a moment, long enough to notice the dust on her skirt and the exhaustion in her face, not long enough to make her uncomfortable. "Abigail has supper ready," he said quietly. That was all. No mention of debt. No mention of ownership. Nothing. Ethan seemed disappointed. He muttered something about returning to town and climbed back into the wagon. Savannah watched him leave. He never looked back. The dust swallowed him before he reached the road. Abigail Turner greeted her inside. The older woman smelled faintly of bread dough and coffee. She showed Savannah a small room at the end of the hallway. A narrow bed, a wash basin, a wooden chair beside the window. Nothing fancy, but clean. Safe. Or at least it looked safe. That night, Savannah sat on the edge of the bed fully dressed. The door was locked. A chair rested beneath the knob. Moonlight slipped through the curtains. The ranch settled into silence. Somewhere outside, a horse snorted. A gate creaked. Then came footsteps. Slow, heavy, moving down the hallway. Savannah's stomach tightened. The footsteps stopped outside her room. She stared at the door. Her breath barely moved. For several seconds there was nothing. Then a quiet knock. Not demanding, not forceful. Just once. Cole's voice came through the wood, low and calm. "I left a few things for you." The footsteps retreated. Savannah waited a full minute before moving. Her hands trembled as she removed the chair and opened the door. A small oil lamp burned in the hallway. At her feet sat 3 things: a key, a cloth pouch, and a stagecoach ticket. She picked up the ticket first. Medicine Ridge. Departure, 8 a.m. The cloth pouch contained enough money to travel. The key fit the ranch gate. Folded beneath them was a short note. The handwriting was neat. If you wish to leave tomorrow, no one will stop you. If you wish to stay, you'll be paid for your work the same as anyone else. The choice is yours. Cole Walker Savannah read the note 3 times, then a 4th. The room felt strangely quiet, not because of the silence, because nobody had ever said those words to her before. The choice is yours. She sat on the bed until dawn. The ticket remained in her hand. Morning sunlight spilled across the floorboards. Outside, ranch hands were already working. Coffee boiled in the kitchen. Boots crossed the porch. Abigail hummed softly while tending the stove. Everyone expected the woman from Missouri to leave. Savannah walked into the kitchen. No one spoke. No one stopped her. She stood before the iron stove, looked at the stagecoach ticket one final time, then pushed it into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and disappeared into the flames. For the first time in a very long time, the next step belonged to her. The smell of burned paper lingered in the kitchen long after breakfast. Abigail Turner said nothing. She simply slid a tin cup of coffee toward Savannah and went back to kneading bread dough. Outside, the morning wind pushed across the pasture. Horses shifted near the corral. Somewhere a hammer struck wood. Life at Cedar Run Ranch moved forward as if decisions like that happened every day. They did not. By noon, Savannah had already surprised half the ranch. When Abigail suggested work in the kitchen, Savannah politely shook her head. "Do you keep records?" she asked. Abigail blinked. "Records? Payroll, feed receipts, supply orders?" The older woman stared at her for a moment, then laughed softly. "You're the first woman who's arrived here asking for ledgers." That afternoon, she found herself standing inside a small office attached to the barn. Dust floated through shafts of sunlight. Shelves held account books, cattle invoices, feed bills, and receipts tied together with faded string. Cole stood near the doorway. "You can read all this?" he asked. Savannah opened one ledger. "Yes." He nodded once. That was all. No surprise. No challenge. No test. He simply left her alone with the books. That bothered her more than suspicion would have. Most men wanted proof. Cole acted as though her word was enough. Days passed. Winter crept closer. Cold mornings painted frost along fence rails before sunrise. Savannah spent hours sorting receipts and balancing figures by lamplight. The numbers began telling a story. Feed costs were rising. Horse sales were falling. And every month the water expenses seemed worse. Cold Creek appeared again and again across the records. One afternoon, Noah Walker dropped a stack of papers onto her desk. The younger man crossed his arms. "You really enjoy this stuff?" Savannah glanced up. "It makes sense. Looks like punishment." She almost smiled. Almost. Noah noticed. "Well, that's progress." For the first time since arriving, she laughed. Outside the office, life continued. She rode with Cole to inspect fence lines. They spent hours beneath enormous Wyoming skies saying very little. Sometimes silence felt awkward. Not with him. One snowy morning, they hauled water barrels from the creek. The wagon wheels groaned through frozen mud. Cole lifted most of the weight himself. When Savannah reached for a barrel, he paused. "You don't have to, I know." She grabbed the handle anyway. A corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. The days settled into a rhythm. Work, meals, wind, distance slowly shrinking. Then came the afternoon by Cold Creek. The stream had begun freezing along the edges. Savannah stepped onto a patch of ice while checking a damaged fence post. The surface cracked. Her boot slipped. For one frightening second, the world tilted. A strong hand caught her arm. Cole pulled her back before she hit the water. The movement was fast, instinctive. Neither spoke. His hand remained around her wrist a second longer than necessary. Her pulse hammered. The winter wind swept across the creek. Finally, he released her. "You all right?" "Yes." "You sure?" She nodded. Their eyes met. Then both looked away. The moment passed, or at least pretended to. That evening, Savannah returned to the office. The ranch was quiet. A lantern flickered beside her desk. She opened another stack of old records. Most were ordinary. Feed invoices, veterinary bills, freight charges from Cheyenne. Then she found something different. A worn document buried beneath years of paperwork. One name appeared near the bottom. Vernon Pike. She frowned, then opened another ledger. The same name. Another. And another. Always connected to land surveys. Water rights. Cold Creek. Outside, the wind rattled the office window. Savannah stared at the papers. Something about them felt wrong. Very wrong. And for the first time since arriving at Cedar Run Ranch, she wondered whether the debt that brought her here had anything to do with money at all. Savannah waited until morning before showing Cole the papers. He was in the barn, checking a sorrel mare's swollen leg. Frost still clung to the rails. His breath showed white in the air. She held the documents against her coat. "Cole." He looked up. The way he did it made her steady herself. No hurry, no annoyance, just attention. She handed him the first receipt. His eyes moved over the lines. Then the next. Then the next. By the time he reached Vernon Pike's name, his jaw had gone still. "Where did you find these?" "Behind the payroll books." Cole folded the papers carefully, as if rough handling might wake whatever was sleeping inside them. "There's a sheriff in Medicine Ridge," he said. "Walter Hayes. He keeps old filings better than most judges." They rode into town after breakfast. Medicine Ridge sat under a pale sky, tucked against low hills and wind-bent pines. The jailhouse stood beside the land office, its stovepipe smoking thin and gray. Sheriff Walter Hayes was writing at his desk when they entered. He wore spectacles low on his nose and had ink on the side of his thumb. He listened without interrupting. Then he took the papers. "This is Pike's hand," he said after a long moment, or close enough to trouble him. Savannah leaned forward. "You know it?" "I've seen enough bank notices to know when a man writes like he owns the whole room." Walter pulled out an older ledger from a locked cabinet. The pages smelled of dust and cold leather. Savannah sat beside him, reading numbers under the weak window light. By noon, the truth began showing itself. Ethan Reed's debt had been nearly paid years before. Small payments, irregular, but real. Somebody had kept the debt alive on paper. Somebody had added fees that did not belong. Cole stood near the stove, silent, his hat in his hands. Savannah did not look at him, but she felt the change in the room. The debt that brought her to Cedar Run had been a chain made of ink. Not law, ink. On the ride home, snow began to fall. Light at first, then hard. Cole kept his horse close to hers when the trail narrowed near Cold Creek. He did not speak for miles. At last he said, "I'm sorry." Savannah turned her head. "For what?" "For the door you were pushed through." The words struck quietly. Not like pity, like a man naming something he wished he could undo. She looked ahead at the white road. "You opened another one." Cole said nothing, but his hand tightened on the reins. Later that week, he found Pike's men near the upper bend of Cold Creek, measuring land with a survey chain. Noah rode back hard with the news. "Pike's buying every parcel north of the creek," he said, throwing his gloves onto the kitchen table. "If he cuts a ditch from the upper spring, Cedar Run dries out before March." Abigail stopped stirring the stew. Savannah set down her pencil. Cole looked toward the window. Beyond the glass, the creek ran thin and dark through snow. That night, he and Savannah rode out to check the high pasture. A sudden storm caught them near the old line cabin. Wind slammed snow against the shutters. The horses stamped in the lean-to. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine boards, cold ashes, and old coffee. Cole lit a fire. Savannah sat on one side of the hearth. He sat on the other. For a long time, the only sound was wood cracking. Then Cole spoke. "My wife died in the spring of '82. Savannah looked up but did not interrupt. Fever took her in 4 days. After that, folks kept telling me time would pass." He stared into the flame. They were right. It passed. It just didn't take much with it. Savannah folded her hands in her lap. "My parents died before I was grown. After that, every roof I slept under belonged to somebody who could remind me of it." Cole lifted his eyes. The firelight moved across his face. No words came for a while. None were needed. Outside, the wind beat against the cabin like a warning. Inside, something quiet had crossed the room between them and settled there. By dawn, the storm had eased. They rode back without speaking much. But they rode closer than before. 3 days later, Sheriff Hayes arrived at Cedar Run with mud on his boots and a hard look in his eyes. "I found it," he said. "Savannah was in the office." Cole stood behind her chair. Walter placed a folded paper on the desk. The original note. "Ethan Reed's debt, paid near full." Pike altered the rest. Savannah touched the edge of the paper. Her hand went cold. Then the bell in town began ringing. Once, twice, again and again. Noon bells never rang like that. Cole stepped outside. A smear of black smoke climbed over Medicine Ridge. Walter swore under his breath. The records building. Savannah stood beside them in the yard, watching the smoke rise into the winter sky. The proof had finally come, and someone had already set fire to the place that held it. For 2 days, Medicine Ridge talked about little else. Men gathered outside the general store. Women paused on boardwalks with baskets in hand. Everyone had seen the smoke. No one claimed to know who started the fire. But everyone seemed to have the same name in mind. Vernon Pike. The banker denied everything. Of course he did. He stood on the porch of his bank with polished boots and a clean collar, acting insulted whenever anyone mentioned the records. Sheriff Walter Hayes wasn't convinced. Neither was Cole. Neither was Savannah. Winter tightened its grip on the valley. Cold Creek ran darker each week. The ranch needed water. The horses needed water. Everything seemed to circle back to that narrow ribbon of life cutting through the Wyoming earth. One evening, Savannah found Cole standing alone near the creek. The sun was sinking behind the mountains. Orange light stretched across the snow. Neither spoke for a while. The water moved quietly between patches of ice. "You should be inside," Cole finally said. "So should you." A faint smile touched his face. It disappeared almost immediately. Savannah stepped closer. "Do you think Pike started the fire?" Cole picked up a stone and tossed it into the creek. The splash vanished quickly. "I think a desperate man does desperate things." The answer lingered between them. Not quite about Vernon Pike. Not entirely. When they walked back toward the ranch house, the distance between them felt smaller than ever. Abigail noticed. She noticed everything. At supper, she hid a smile behind her coffee cup, while Savannah and Cole reached for the same biscuit basket. Both withdrew at once. Both looked away. Abigail said nothing. The smile stayed. 3 nights later, the storm arrived. Not snow. Rain. Cold, relentless rain. The kind that fell high in the mountains where nobody could see it. The kind ranchers feared. Near midnight, frantic knocking shook the front door. Noah burst inside, soaked to the bone. "Upper dam!" Everyone was on their feet instantly. "What happened?" Cole asked. Noah struggled for breath. "Somebody broke it." The room went still. Outside, thunder rolled through the darkness. Then came another sound, a distant roar, low at first, growing. Cole moved before anyone else. He grabbed his coat. His rifle stayed on the wall. This wasn't a gun problem. This was water. The roar grew louder. Savannah stepped onto the porch behind the others. Her stomach dropped. A black wall of floodwater was racing down from the canyon. Lantern light flashed across terrified horses. Men shouted. Gates slammed. Wood cracked. The night exploded into motion. "Get the South Corral open!" Cole yelled. Ranch hands ran through mud and rain. Noah limped toward the lower fence line. Savannah joined Abigail and several workers hauling ropes from the barn. The flood struck moments later. Water slammed against the corrals. Horses screamed. Fence posts snapped. The entire ranch seemed to shake. Rain stung Savannah's face. Mud covered her skirt. She barely noticed. All she could see was Cole. He was waist-deep in icy water trying to free trapped horses. Again and again he disappeared behind waves and debris. Again and again he emerged. The current grew stronger. Noah shouted something Savannah couldn't hear. Then it happened. A section of fencing collapsed. Water surged through. Cole lunged toward a frightened mare caught in the wreckage. For one terrible second, he looked back toward the ranch, toward the lights, toward her. Then the current hit, and he vanished. Savannah froze. Everything else seemed to disappear. The shouting, the rain, the thunder. Gone. Only the empty water remained. No, she was already moving. Hands grabbed her before she could enter the flood. Noah held her shoulders. His face was pale. "We need the rope." The next hours blurred together. Lanterns, mud, rain, searching, praying, waiting. The longest night of Savannah's life. Near dawn, someone shouted from downstream. Men ran. Walter Hayes had arrived from town with volunteers. They found Cole tangled against fallen cottonwoods nearly half a mile away. Alive, barely conscious, but alive. When they carried him into the ranch house, Savannah followed without leaving his side. The doctor from Medicine Ridge arrived shortly after sunrise. Exhaustion, bruises, cold. Nothing worse. The entire ranch seemed to breathe again. By evening, the house had gone quiet. The storm was finally passing. A lamp burned beside Cole's bed. Savannah sat in a wooden chair near the window. Hours slipped by. She never moved. Her hand rested over his. The first time she had ever held it without fear or hesitation. Outside, water dripped from the eaves. Inside, the room smelled of coffee, wet wool, and medicine. Just before midnight, Cole stirred. His eyes opened slowly, confused at first, then focused. He saw her. Savannah tried to speak. Nothing came out. The relief hurt too much. Finally, tears slipped down her cheeks. "I couldn't lose you." The words escaped before she could stop them. Cole looked at her, not surprised, not confused, just quiet, as though he had heard something he'd been waiting for. Neither of them noticed the storm ending outside. But by morning, everything would change. And before the next sunset, Savannah Reed would be packing her suitcase. The storm had passed. Cold Creek no longer whispered through the valley. Now it rushed. Brown water moved between its banks, carrying broken branches and pieces of fence downstream. The flood had taken plenty from Cedar Run Ranch, but it had failed to take the one thing Savannah could not bear to lose. Cole was alive. That should have been enough. Yet as sunlight filled the ranch house, a strange heaviness settled over her. Sheriff Walter Hayes arrived before noon. His horse was lathered from the ride. Mud covered the hem of his coat. Abigail poured coffee while Noah closed the front door against the wind. Walter removed a folded document from his saddlebag. We got him. No one asked who. Nobody needed to. Vernon Pike. Walter laid several papers on the table. Land filings, bank records, witness statements, the original debt note. Enough evidence to survive any courtroom in the territory. The judge signed the warrant this morning. Cole studied the papers quietly. Savannah stared at the document carrying Ethan Reed's name. For months, that debt had shaped every step of her life. Now it was nothing. Just ink. Just paper. Just a lie. Walter tapped the page. You owe nobody anything, Miss Reed. The room fell silent. Nobody. The word echoed louder than thunder. For the first time since she could remember, no person held a claim over her future. No uncle. No debt. No bargain. No obligation. Freedom should have felt easy. Instead, it frightened her, because now every road ahead belonged entirely to her. That evening, she sat alone in the office. A lantern glowed beside stacks of ranch ledgers. Outside, horses shifted in the pasture. The familiar sounds of Cedar Run surrounded her. The sounds she had slowly come to recognize as home. She opened a leather notebook, the one she had filled during long winter evenings. Page after page held notes, water management plans, breeding records, pasture rotations, ideas for improving the ranch over the next 5 years. At the very end, she hesitated. Then she wrote one final line. She closed the cover. The next morning, she packed her suitcase. Abigail found her first. The older woman stood in the doorway for a long moment. Neither spoke. Then Abigail crossed the room and hugged her, hard. You stubborn girl. Savannah laughed softly through tears. You knew? I've known for months. Abigail stepped back. So has everyone else. Everyone except the 2 people who mattered most. By noon, the stagecoach waited near the edge of Medicine Ridge. Passengers loaded trunks and parcels. The driver checked harnesses. Wind swept dust across the road. Savannah climbed aboard. She chose a seat beside the window. Her suitcase rested beside her feet. No one stopped her. Not Walter. Not Noah. Not Abigail. And not Cole. The horses started forward. Medicine Ridge slowly began to slide away. Savannah stared out the window. Then she saw him, a rider, fast, coming hard down the road. Cole Walker. The stagecoach driver pulled the team to a stop. Dust swirled around them. Cole swung down from his horse. For a second, neither moved. Then he walked to the window. His hat was gone. His hair was windblown. His boots were covered in mud. He looked exactly like a man who had ridden without thinking. Savannah opened the coach door and stepped down. The world seemed strangely quiet. Only wind, only distant horses, only them. Cole held out the notebook. Her notebook. I read it. She lowered her eyes, at the edge of embarrassment, at the edge of hope. You shouldn't have. I did. He opened to the final page, then looked directly at her. The ranch became home before I realized it. Her breath caught. Cole closed the book. I won't ask you to stay. The words hurt more than she expected. She nodded once, trying to hide it. Then he took a slow breath. But if you do, his voice softened. Let it be because you chose it. The wind moved through the prairie grass. Neither spoke. For months he had given her something no one else ever had. Not orders, not ownership, not promises. A choice. Savannah looked toward the waiting stagecoach, then toward Cedar Run Ranch beyond the distant hills, and finally back to him. Tears blurred her vision. She laughed softly at herself, then stepped away from the coach, toward Cole. toward the life she wanted. This time, nobody had decided for her, not even him. The driver tipped his hat. The stagecoach rolled away, leaving them standing together in the Wyoming wind. Spring arrived early the following year. Cold Creek ran full and clear. Green spread across the valley. Foals stumbled through the pasture beside their mothers. New fencing lined the creek banks. The ranch looked alive again. On a warm afternoon, children's voices drifted from a small schoolhouse near the ranch. Savannah stood on the porch listening to them practice spelling words. Inside, chalk scratched across slate boards. Outside, sunlight covered the grasslands. Cole walked up beside her carrying 2 cups of coffee. She accepted one. Together they watched the children through the open window. After a while, Savannah smiled. What if I'd stayed on that coach? Cole looked toward the distant mountains, then back at her. I would have let you go. She studied him. Really? He nodded. Because the reason I love you isn't that you stayed. His hand found hers. It's that you were free to leave. The wind carried the scent of grass and running water. In the pasture below, horses thundered across the field beneath the shadow of the Bighorn Mountains. Savannah leaned gently against his shoulder. Far beyond the ranch, the sun settled toward the horizon. A light glowed from the house. Children laughed from the schoolyard. And for the first time in both their lives, neither of them was searching for somewhere to belong. They had already found it. As the sun settled behind the Wyoming hills and the last light stretched across the pasture, it became clear that this story was never really about a debt, a ranch, or even a distant piece of land. It was about 2 people who carried old wounds for so long that they almost forgot what it felt like to be seen. Maybe that's why this story stays with us, because if you place yourself in Savannah's boots for a moment, standing beside that stagecoach with a free road ahead and no one left to tell you what to do, you realize how frightening freedom can be. And if you stand where Cole once stood, after years of loss and silence, you understand how much courage it takes to open your heart one more time. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with grand speeches. Sometimes it looks like a door left unlocked, a seat saved at the table, a hand offered without pressure, a choice freely given. And maybe that's the lesson hidden beneath the dust and wind of Medicine Ridge. Real love isn't about holding on. It's about creating a place where someone is free to stay. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to hear what moment stayed in your heart the longest. Leave a comment and share it with us. And if you enjoy stories about second chances, quiet strength, enduring love, and the kind of people who help each other find their way home, I hope you'll join us again. There are many more journeys waiting beyond the next trail, and I'd be honored to share them with you.